So, good morning, comrades. This is Dr. G again, and this is the second part of the series that I'm making about the morality of armed resistance. It's part of our political education uh, uh, um, endeavor, and the reason why we're undertaking this political education piece is so that our people are educated and are nourished with the right kind of information that is going to cause this. Uh, 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 um, movement to attain the desired results. At the end of the last episode, if you have not listened to it, go look out for it and listen to it as well. We're explaining the various criteria that make for an arm resistance to be justified. We said that there has to be a just cause, there has to be an application of comparative justice, there has to be the right intention, it has to be the armed resistance needs to be the last resort, there needs to be a probability of success, and there must be application of proportionality and the determination of competent authority. At the end of the last episode, this the silent point that emerged out of it came from this quote from Simon Weil that says that it's not the cause for which men took up arms that makes a victory more just or less just. It is the order that's established when arms have been laid down. And we were saying that this places an additional responsibility on everybody who is participating in this in this resistance movement, this Amazonian movement at the time, to begin to be futuristic, to start looking ahead at the society that we are building as a result of this process, to make sure that we're not doing things today that are going to ultimately make the task of justifying the resistance difficult in the minds of the people. So, in this episode, I'm going to continue with the various criteria, beginning with last resort. Armed resistance is supposed to be the last resort. Now, last resort means that all reasonable, peaceful means must be exhausted before the would be resistance is justified in resorting to force. In the case of war between nations, peaceful means include seeking mediation through third party, appealing to United Nations, or taking the case to the World Court. Now, such means must have been exhausted before a resort to force is justified. In the case of armed resistance in a democratic country, this criteria would mean that election campaigns, lawsuits, petitioning, lobbying, protest marches, strikes, and other recognized forms of legitimate protest must have been tried without success or have been made illegal by the government before armed resistance is justified. Um, However, this does not mean that the victims of oppression must go through the motions of trying to unseat locked in incumbents in fraudulent elections, appealing to corrupt judges, or lobbying legislators who pay them no attention. If the means of armed resistance are being taken away, then the time to last resort has arrived. So I think when we look at this criteria of last resort, it's somebody make the argument say we need for be able to demonstrate so we don't exhaust all the possible alternatives before resorting to an armed resistance. And I feel say what the Ambazonian resistance movement don't demonstrate a lot of don't demonstrate in a sense saying after 56 odd years of trying alternatives, the armed resistance was an eventuality. It was something that was going to eventually happen. Funcha, they don't from the time of the following the referendum and all the management of the post 1972 engagements, through the frustrations with participating in the process, the resignation of Funcha from government, the effort where people like Pamola, Joe, Litombe, and all the associate them done, and from Koji Dinka them done, they do over all these years. Essentially bring which the place where we realize say would actually meet the last resort criteria. And even within the restructuring of the movement, we will realize say when we did this phase of the movement we start for 2016, it was not immediately a resource weapon. Okay. And this one be very important for people that like to throw out all these narratives about the fact that Amazonians are like people really they just like to resort to violence. All we remember say we came out with peace plans. When I attended the Washington conference that was the forming and the foundation of Maurice, the whole conversation in that conference was all about mounting international pressure, protest against the regime, which is the reason why we established Country Sundays. This is the reason why we established ghost towns, which is the reasons why we organize various protests around the country, which is the reason why we have been protesting in all the cities around the world, but in most of the major cities around the world. But we don't realize, say, number one, we are dealing with a government which does not meet the legitimacy criteria of the respect to its institutions and take all of this legitimate recourse to resistance for granted. It doesn't mean nothing to them. So I think in so many ways the last resort criteria has been met. The range of peaceful means might be much more limited now. Even to resort to strike might bring almost as much retaliation from the government as would armed resistance itself. In such cases, because the government has limited the peaceful options of the population, this criteria is much easier to satisfy. So I feel say the Ambazonia resorting to armed resistance criteria don't be met in so many ways. The next criterion is probability of success. Now, probability of success means that the would-be resistant must have some reasonable hope of winning, in order to achieve the just cause. Now, certainty isn't required, but a good chance is. Otherwise, the spilling of blood is going to be in vain, which would be immoral. Now, if an opponent initiates an armed attack, however, this criteria is satisfied, no matter how poor the chances of success is. Resistance against overwhelming odds can still be a witness to a just cause. And we feel say we don't particularly meet this. We meet up this criteria for one reason. Number one, the war was declared on us. Number two, the space we did now a do or die business. They don't strip we of everything we had. The fact that the majority of our brothers then be dispersed in the diaspora. Now the product of 36 plus 56 odd years of systematic disenfranchisement. The fact that we don't get people them from our circles, them, like people them within the SDF and opposition, we don't struggle within this regime for create redress. The fact that the regime in itself don't place people in the place where all man be on his knees, essentially means say the question of the probability of success no longer be valid. The minute we feel ascertain say we will not get option, we will not get choice. It is resistance or perish. Why is it resistance or perish? It's resistance or perish because the majority of us have been driven away from our homeland. The majority of us have been driven away from our home of birth. We are experts spread all around the world, and without having the kind of opportunities and fair chances that we are entitled to on the basis of where we are coming from. So it becomes extremely important that we take that into consideration. Now, proportionality is the other criterion. And proportionality means that in considering whether to initiate use of force, means that there would be resistance movement must compare the unavoidable damage that will be done by war with the damage that will result if no resistance is offered. The harm done by war must not outweigh the good to be achieved and the harm averted by war. It must be proportional. It means we must not discount all our options and realize, say, the only way we fit get as a pass route to a better and a more secure future now by means of an armed resistance. And I think so we'll meet up that criteria. Because when we find ourselves the extent of the second class citizenship and the enslavement, there is no brighter hope in view than to resist. The proof of this particular criteria don't be in our case the realization say within the last 4 years, this government don't produce more reforms on the basis of this specific resistance movement than they have done in the last 40, 50, 60 odd years. A case in point is the application of their so-called decentralization movement. Within the last 4 years, something that was enacted in 1996, they never went back to it. And we must not forget that this drive for decentralization that was enacted in 1996 was a response, an outcome to the all Anglophone conferences that were taking place in Buea and Bamenda at the time. So there's a sense in which there is a pattern that must be observed. Every time our people have arisen Anglophones. And I'm thinking it's within the same period, in 94, 95, 96, that we had these conversations around the creation of the GCE board and all of the arguments and the protests that our people were placing on the table. That led to this copy and paste of the French constitution that says that the state is, in its essence, one and indivisible, and the whole rigmarole about the decentralization constitution that was produced in 1996 caused our people to uh, go to sleep, and then 20 years after that, they have not done anything about it. So we are dealing with an unrepentant, tyrannical force here, which does not respond to the force of reason and logic. They have one logic: is the logic of the preservation of power. They have one logic: is the desire to subjugate, preserve, enslave. And every time the slave wants to break free from that enslavement, they would give them like sweets, something to try and calm them down or to use their own against them. It ultimately gets us to the point where we have determined that the only way to break free from this predicament is to confront them head on. which is a justification of the arms movement. The other criteria about the competent authority, it fits much more with the war doctrine. In the case of armed resistance, however, just war scholars have not given any helpful guidance who has authority to call the people to revolt. Obviously, no one can have such a legal or constitutional power. Now, armed resistance is justified, however, by the belief that lawful power originates from the people, not in the government, and the people have the right to resist a government that exceeds its lawful authority. So this one are much more your much more ideological arguments about the this origin of legitimate power within any a political construct, whether it resides with a certain class of society that may become the aristocrats, the bourgeoisie, the landowners within your standard revolution rhetoric, or it belongs to the people. You know, we realize say every revolution in history don't be fundamentally driven by the notion, say, the ultimate power resides with the people. You know, the French Revolution was an initiative and effort to overthrow the dominance of the aristocracy and giving liberté, fraternité, and empowering le bas peuple, you know, the people at the base, where true authority to govern is truly derived from. Now, the essence and the purpose that of democracy. Democracy representativeness suggests, say, a few people then who can receive the responsibility for exercise authority over the rest of the people, or for act on behalf of the people. And the purpose of regular elections now to renew that mandate. Obviously, the intention don't be significantly deviated from when it was from the what was conceptualized when it was initially created, because people don't become now masters of that process. You know, the process of conducting regular elections, the process of going to secure power from the people and coming to exercise it, to the extent that the people who are now exercising authority have even lost the sense of where that power is coming from. They have actually gotten to a place where, because they have access to state institutions and the power bases that come with that, they can now manipulate and own that authority away from the people. And the people sit and they are crumbling under the weight of designated responsibilities that they have no means of changing. Now, why that would see say we don't get to the point where inside La République Cameroon, their president don't go incommunicado, missing in action. And a few people, because they control the army and have deep pockets and international friends and partners, are struggling to define the outcome of the people of people on behalf of the people. Now, armed resistance, the fundamental philosophy of armed resistance suggests, say, the power belongs to the people, and the people have the right to determine for themselves how they are going to exercise that power. Now, Thomas Jefferson, in the American Declaration of Independence, had this to say: is that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of its own end, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute a new government in such a form as to them shall seem most likely to effect their safety and happiness. Now, this is Churchill quoting Thomas Jefferson. In short, the people themselves are their own competent authority to judge when resistance is justified. Ultimately, individuals may have to draw a line in the sand for themselves and resist when the government crosses that line. Now, such individuals may set up an example for others to follow, or may actually take a leadership role in organizing resistance, attracting followers and elaborating the just cause rationale for resistance. To the extent that they are successful in attracting followers, the competent authority criteria is full. So remember, I said this particular last piece, now for say, if there's a competent authority to define, to declare the armed resistance, then it becomes justifiable. Now, in this case, the competent authority is the people. Now, Alexander Hamilton, also quoted in Churchill, says that if the representatives of the people betray their constituents, there is then no resource left but in the extension of that original right of self-defense, which is paramount to all positive forms of government. Ryszard Koplinski uh, says that all books about revolutions begin with a chapter that describes the decay of tottering authority or the misery and suffering of the people. They should begin with a psychological chapter, one that shows how a harassed, terrified man suddenly breaks his terror, stops being afraid. This unusual process sometimes is accomplished in an instant, like a shock or illustration demands emulating. Man gets rid of fear and feels free. Without that, there would be no revolution. So this writer, they essentially make the argument, say the one criteria for kickstart a resistance movement and revolution now for cast away fear. And a place would they now inside this revolution. The reason why we don't be able to stand up to this regime now because we don't cast away the fear. We don't take the fear through them. You're going to realize say the last time we La République Cameroon tried to get a kind of a widespread resistance, the 2008 hunger strikes in Douala, they don't get the habit for send down massive troops, for just kill the resistance, terrorize people, shoot people, them arrest people, them, commandement or president, simple, they disappear. A reign of terror, They don't use fear for control, for subjugate, for keep people them bound to their grip and their caprices. Now, you realize even that is the protests and start in Jesse Boya in the early 2000s, and the same thing they will do. They will just bring some of that Kutaba boys them with helicopter, they just can land. And as soon as they enter, begin destroying some Morito, they broke door them, they arrest students, then they beat them, rob them for mob. Now their system of exercising fear, where we don't stay under all these years. Now because of fear. But this current resistance movement, it shows say we don't cast away fear. Why this resistance movement will succeed? Why it don't be such a difference? Now because contrary to all our Republic actions in the past couple of years, and contrary to what they be used to within the treatment of their own citizens, Southern Cameroonians, the ambassador, and this time don't decide for talk say we no fear. And I want personally talk say the one thing we don't make this difference. Now say, and when this whole thing be start, because all of these people that inside this regime, they get this mindset, say they be entitled, they be entitled to governance, they be entitled to leadership, they be entitled to rulership. Inside their mind, Famendongo them, Betty Asomo them, all these ministers, the way they be arrest Bala them, lock them up, they be get this mindset where they tell and say this thing, and even tell late Paul Biya be declare war on our people. The expectation may be the same with 1 or 2 or 3 months of the establishment of the reign of terror, the people them go run back, enter their shells them, and anything go don't finish. When should they be known as say this frustration will not be pent up and built up over a long time. So they try to shock them and say, by the time they want to begin the cash begin the football University of Boya, rob the inside mud. By the time they want to begin the establish reign of terror, begin to shoot people, then catch some so cut the head, and do all these things, then burn houses and me up here. They met resistance. Resistance that the people said that enough is enough. We're not afraid of you guys anymore. When person don't the greatest fear will keep people them from getting engaged, among other sub fears, not the fear of death. So when you meet before people, and anytime person decide to take up a lesser weapon, then guns, decide to engage a professional army, that person will tell you say, the last way remain for me in my life, I don't fear to lose it. When you lose fear, you position a revolution to engage tyranny. When you lose fear, you challenge the tyrant by looking him in the eyes. And for the first couple of instances, his primary reaction is going to be shock because the master is not used to the slave resisting his domination and the slavery. Now, why that resistance them? Resistance them usually they take the tyrant on take them by shock. It ultimately belongs to the citizens to be able to determine when a resistance is justified or not. So that's when citizens reach a point where resistance appears better than continued oppression, when the fear of the government longer outweighs the determination to throw off the shackles, the spark of the revolution has been struck. I want to stop this particular episode for explain to our people and say, make we understand, say, nothing will happen for give right to this current resistance movement. We ultimately don't be backed up to a place where we meet up this criteria. A criteria will say we don't dissociate ourselves with fear. We don't cast off the shackles of fear. Now, whether the spark dies or instead starts a flame depends on other circumstances. But the citizen who has been pushed to the limit, whose line in the sand has been crossed, can satisfy the competent authority aspect. Now, if all these requirements are met, then armed resistance is justified. However, even a justified war is not true. That is all fair. The two requirements of war conduct must also be met. um, which are discrimination and proportionality. And I'm going to deal with this in the next series that comes. So thank you for listening to this. Check out the other episodes and the other audios that are going to be made in this particular series, which is on the morality of the armed resistance, morality of armed resistance, the doctrine of a just war, to be able to help us process the current armed resistance, its causes, and the consequences that are possible to emerge out of this. Um, God bless you and look out for subsequent episodes. So this is part two of this particular series. I'm going to be doing part three shortly.